So I just wanted to welcome everybody tonight. I'm Jim Thomas. I know most of you. I'm part of Envision Tawnytown. We've been around for, I guess, 4 or 5 years and trying to look at ways just to build community in Tawnytown. This is one of the ways we're doing this with these monthly talks that we've been doing. We have other projects going in town. We subsidize flowers for businesses in the spring, have some public artwork projects that we're slowly working on, the traffic control boxes in town with the state of putting artwork on those. What else are we doing here? We're also, when the snow melts, whenever, I guess now in June, right? We're starting a children's mini library trail, and what that means is that we'll have libraries in town at the police department, fire department, and at the railroad tracks that will be a map so kids can walk through the town with families and get books from those locations. And then we're putting libraries in businesses so that there'll be kids' books like in restaurants for teaching kids how to cook, whatever's going to be around town. So hopefully in the spring we'll get that map together and get those libraries placed. So that's also coming. And local artists are painting the boxes, so having some fun with getting all that together. So tonight, I guess in the last probably 5 talks we've given have been really related to building community and what's it like for a town to begin to really work to create its identity. Obviously, it's going to happen over a long period of time when you live here and meet people and shop in new spaces, but it's kind of an interesting proposition to see how you do that in a deliberate way, both in getting people to participate more and volunteer, and just to know each other and to build partnerships and relationships through the town. So we've looked at ways from developing identity from an historical perspective, and that'll be partly tonight and what this talk will be about, so people can really identify with the place that they live, both from a current standpoint with creating beauty in the town, but also historically in the history, both narratives through people's history, but also through the history of place. So one thing we're going to be doing with Envision Tawnytown, and I've talked to Doug Hecht about this, and I want to talk with Nancy Eiler through the Historical Society, is how to get these narratives that have been collected for a long period of time on people that have lived here, and really get those to be accessible and more public, so people can begin to see who's lived here, what their story is, because that's part of how we identify and see ourselves in other people's stories. So to be able to consciously be able to get those out and around town, we feel is really, really important. So tonight we'll be really oriented towards looking again at place and creating how does the town and its history really speak to what the future of the town is going to look like. How do we transform this history so that certainly the town has to evolve. It's not about this static thing and necessarily keeping it the same, but there's a dynamic approach to using this history, informing the present, and just to create this identity for folks in the town. Okay? So tonight is with Winona Peterson and Dean Camlin. And I'll start with Dean because we were talking at dinner. We decided 45 years, I think, we've known each other. Our kids were in school together. And I think Dean has been an architect since 1977, if I have the date right, or graduated from school and then professionally involved.
Yeah, I wasn't licensed until
Not
86.
licensed,
So.
but been around structures, a lot of experience with historic commissions, various projects in states, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and also done projects here in Tawnytown. So just has a really good practical knowledge of both Carroll County. Probably a lot of you know him already. And again, just a very long career around buildings and structure and historic structures. So Dean will be, they'll sort of be co-hosting this tonight. And Winona, who's new to me, has a career with the Park Service over a long period of time, and talking with her at dinner, wearing lots of hats. I think I was impressed because she can make a mean pie from scratch, but also doing administrative work as an archivist, and she can tell you more about that with a lot of positions within the Park Service, working here in Gettysburg for a long period of time. Park ranger, administration, chief ranger, historian, cultural resource specialist. And in the last 5 years, she was the historian responsible for assessments completed at 8 historic parks in the Northeast region. And then within the last year, she's been on the Preservation Maryland Board of Directors. So really interesting background to hear her sort of speak from this perspective, from the park perspective, and bringing this now into historic buildings. And so they'll be sort of co-hosting this tonight. I think that you all can decide whether you want to take questions and whether we can make this more of a discussion. Obviously, I want to give them a chance to speak, but we can see how that goes. If it gets too overwhelming in terms of time, you don't get done, we'll have to maybe save those to the end.
Sure.
So, Winona, you
Yep,
go
I'm
first?
going to go first, yeah. Thank you. So when Dean and I met last week to talk about how we were going to do this, have this conversation with you all, we were thinking we would just have a conversation. We would take questions and answers, and then the latent park ranger in me came out, and I was like, you really need to have a slideshow or do some sort of a presentation to kind of make sure that people are coming along with you and you're able to read and see what we're talking about. Because I am going to talk philosophically about historic preservation, because I spent the last 25 years of my career managing historic resources, landscapes, monuments, buildings, the stories about Gettysburg and Eisenhower and other parks that I worked with. So I'm going to be sort of up here talking about historic preservation from sort of this philosophical standpoint, and then Dean is going to he is going to actually talk about the practicalities of grant applications and how you go through that process. Because in the time that I was working for the National Park Service, I was in the federal bubble of these are the processes that you have to do, and they're very specific and they're very regimented, and it's very different from the way the world is out here. And so I can't speak to that very clearly because I'm just stepping out of the bubble and learning about how the communities are able to work through these things. So that's kind of where we are. Dean, did you want to say anything more at this point?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, all right. And I do want it to be kind of conversational, so if as we're talking questions come up, we'll try to answer them and go from there. So what is historic preservation? When someone says historic preservation to you, what does that mean? In your mind, what do you think?
Don't let it fall down.
Don't let it fall down. Sure.
Save it.
Save it.
And preserving, I think, obviously a period of time that's significant.
Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts? The curious thing that when you talk about historic preservation, many times and Dean and I talked about this, you hear is, I don't want someone telling me what to do with a property that I own. And that's not what this is at all.
Or even telling me what I can't do with the property.
Correct. And so, I kind of want to dispel that myth of it's somebody coming in and saying, you shall, you will, because preservation is on this full spectrum of things. It is small acts. Preservation, picking up trash in the city is preservation, because you're preserving what the space looks like and you're projecting community pride. When I worked at Gettysburg in the early 90s, we had a park cleanup day where everybody that could get away from their desk went out and picked up trash. And that was preservation, because people saw us out as employees actively taking care of the space. It's cleaning up spaces around your buildings. If you've got weeds and it looks unsightly, preservation is that too. It's preserving photographs. People have, there's a family here this evening that has 9 generations of family in this community, and you have all kinds of really awesome, cool things. That's preservation, because what you have informs what happens in our community. So it's, you know, it's all of these things. It's not just these big things like the cathedral at Notre Dame burned to the ground and now we have to rebuild it. It is that, but it can be all of these other things. So I don't want y'all to feel overwhelmed about what preservation means for our community, because it can be small things. And right up to repairing of historic buildings. So right to save it, don't let it fall down. It's statutory in nature. So here's the career bureaucrat coming out in me. Historic preservation in this country is based on laws that Congress passes for all of us. And when I worked for the park, the Antiquities Act of 1906 was the foundation of much of the work that we were doing. It's for federal properties, and it is for archaeological sites, building sites of national significance. And that is the law that gives the president the authority to set aside national monuments. So whether you like it or you don't, that's the law that allows the president to say, this space is of such national significance, by my decree, it is now a preserved, protected space. So that's a pretty important law. Thank you, Teddy Roosevelt. The statute that's relevant to our community is the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, which is currently under attack. It is a law that much of the work that I did at Gettysburg was based upon this. I was doing Section 110 work, which is the identification of nationally significant resources, and the bulk of my job was Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which was us looking at anything we needed to do. Let's say we needed to do work on a monument. So we had to look at that monument, look at the work that we were going to do, and take our actions, the effects of our actions, into account. So you couldn't just go out and sandblast a marble monument. You know, you had to be mindful and careful about what it is that you did for a specific historic resource. The National Historic Preservation Act also creates a database of significant resources. If you have not ever gone online and looked at the National Register of Historic Places, the website that comes up, you can search by state, you can search by county, and it identifies all of the properties that have been documented and approved for listing on the National Register. And Tawnytown is on the National Register. We are actually listed as a historic district. This is the verbiage only part of the National Register documentation for Tawnytown. There are 190 pages. Most of it is photographs of buildings in town. And some of them are very difficult to see because they're lousy photocopies, but it's available to you. The original should be at the state archives. So this list is maintained by the National Park Service, but it is administered locally by the states, by communities. And as I said, documentation is required, and this is documentation for our city.
Is the town an historic district?
It is a historic district, yes. It's listed as
Are all the towns in Carroll County historic?
Most of them are, and what's really interesting, I participated in the comprehensive plan for the county. This past summer, I volunteered to work on the economic work group, and the only historic district that's identified by name is Uniontown. And I asked them, I said, well, what about the other 12 historic districts that are in the county? And they all kind of looked at me funny, and I said, I'm telling you. And I went, I brought up the paperwork, and Uniontown is the only one that has a HARB, a Historic Architectural Review Board. And so therefore, that was the only one that they were gonna recognize because there was not an entity that reviewed work that happened for the other historic districts. Which I thought was kind of weird, but that's what they told me when I asked the question. I asked a lot of questions that I got funny looks at, but that's okay.
And I'd like to pass this around. This map shows the boundaries of the National Register District here in Tawnytown. I only made one copy, so sorry about that.
And if any of you want to look at this while we're talking too, you're welcome to. I didn't make multiple copies of this either. It's really interesting because it largely, and you'll see it on the map, it's largely the main streets is what they have captured as the historic district in town. And it's largely talking about buildings. There's a little bit of talk about streetscapes. And I think part of that is because it was approved in 1986. And in 1986, we weren't yet talking about landscapes as significant things that you wanted to maintain.
Right.
So back to your experience with the planning commission, if they change those designations so that all those 12 other districts were union towns, what are the implications of that?
Well, I think what it does is like Uniontown, I pushed really hard in that meeting that if you have development coming up to the borders of a historic district, you don't want to build skyscrapers because that then impacts the visual appearance of that historic district. And I did get them to put in the plan a statement about minding the height of development, but it was only for Uniontown. It wasn't for all the rest of the communities. You know, because some of the people in that work group were talking about, well, we've got to build up. We need to build 10 and 12-story buildings. And I'm thinking, who's going to be in those 10 and 12-story buildings in Carroll County? You know, it just, there were a lot of developers in that particular group. So that's a really good question. And I think the limiting part of it was there was no HARB in the other districts. The National Register has criteria that you have to meet in order to be listed on the National Register, and there they are. Criteria A is basically events that are significant. B is associated with the lives of a person of significance. The Eisenhower Historic Site, for example, is under A. B, and C, I think, is the National Register because Eisenhower was president, 5-star general. C, that embodies distinctive characteristics of a type style, and D, that have yielded or may be likely to yield. That's mostly archaeology. That's what we are listed under is criteria A, criteria C. And it's largely because Tawnytown was a crossroads town. It was a tavern town. Early on, there were taverns on all four corners. It was a place on the way to someplace else. Gee, has that changed at all? And then the criteria C is because of the architecture. And they talk very clearly in the National Register about how the original architecture is very clearly tied to the Pennsylvania German immigrants that are moving out of Pennsylvania. They're heading south towards settlement. Some of them stayed. You've got very distinctive German architecture in the brick houses, and you can attest to that, right? Having just come from Germany or growing up in Germany. And so then as the town develops, and it's really interesting to me, the agricultural aspect that surrounds Tawnytown. They mention in the National Register that one of the distinctive characteristics is that the farms come right up to the edge of the town. Mm-hmm. So there's very little separation from the farm community that's outside of the city and the city itself. And the city develops because the farmers need blacksmiths and the farmers need people to work leather. And so the commercial aspects that come into town are all supporting that agricultural function. And really, it became clear to me during that comprehensive planning that we still have the bulk of the agriculture in our part of the world. And so I think that's something that the city and the residents need to think about. Is it important for us to continue to have that agricultural aspect around our city when we're talking about development? So the National Register lists 280 contributing buildings, 1 significant structure, 1 significant object, and 51 non-contributing resources.
What's the object?
What's the object?
It doesn't say.
Oh.
And
Yeah,
that's
pretty
the,
frustrating.
well, and it's really curious because Jim was saying that he would love to know what those 280 buildings are. And it has to be somewhere. The list has to be somewhere because when we did the National Register for the battlefield, I mean, it goes on, it's pages and pages. That National Register documentation is 780 pages long. But you have to include every resource. You know, there's 1,600 monuments, so it was easy to get that many pages in that particular National Register. So this list has to be somewhere. We just need to find it. Because it would be really good to know which are the contributing buildings as of 1986. Because there may be, you know, the cutoff is 50 years. That was done in 1986. So there are other things that have happened in this town within that 50-year window. So, thank you, Jim, for taking pictures for us. He's the photographer. I wanted to use this one because the City Hall is called out as a really important building, that it was adaptively reused when it was no longer the firehouse, became the City Hall. And I wanted to mention the mural on the side of the building because Bob Jones, the former economic development director, had applied for a grant to do some restoration work on that. And that's preservation, finding money to take care of things like that, because that's a really cool part of town. Did you want to say anything, Jim, about that? Okay. All right, here's another example of a streetscape, because I think for Tawnytown, one of the things that's coolest to me as a historian and as somebody who studies landscapes and historic structures is that there is so much here that's intact. We just need to figure out how to preserve what's there in a way that continues to maintain the character of Tawnytown. I mean, look at these buildings. They're really cool. There's some really neat things here. Here's another streetscape. Look at this building. I'm trying not to trip over the cord. Look at this guy with the fancy decorative along the roof. That's really cool. One of the things talked about in there is the woodwork on the porches, which is disappearing quickly. And that's one of the character defining features of this town and the architecture of this town. But you know what? It costs money to paint wood, and people want to do what's easiest. This is a fabulous example of adaptive reuse of a historic structure. It is your building, and it's wonderful. In my memory, it was a flower shop, and now you use it as an event space. Do you want to? There is one tonight. And, you know, here's a structure that is an ancillary structure. It's not the primary building associated with that property. He's taking care of the primary building too. It's pretty awesome.
Living in it.
And he lives there. But, you know, here is a thing that it's a carriage house. It could have just been left to fall down, and it wasn't. And look at the character that it gives to the community. Here's another example, the bed and breakfast there, George's on York Street, of really awesome adaptive reuse. It was changed from a primary residence to now it's a bed and breakfast. And just really cool buildings in town. So I want to talk a little bit about, does anybody have any questions about anything that I just talked about in terms of historic preservation and what it means and sort of this? Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, who authored or compiled all the data for that, for the register on Tawnytown?
Last name was Getty. You
Yeah,
know.
Joe Getty.
Okay.
And I think one nice thing that is a possibility is that we could talk to Joe and find out
What
more
those
about
were.
what those 280 contributing resources were, what that one historic significant object was.
Yeah. Because the National Register has very specific definitions for what those things are. Because when we did the one for Gettysburg, we listed the collection, the museum collection, as nationally significant and identified objects as part of the museum collection. And the State Historic Preservation Office kept coming back saying, you aren't understanding, that's not what an object is. And we kept saying, but we want these collection things to be covered as significant, because if we don't put them somewhere, they can be traded. Because at one point in time, there was an effort to trade original cannon tubes for buttons for an exhibit. And the cannon tubes have been on the battlefield since the 1890s, and they're part of a monument. They're not just a tube, you know, so we were trying really hard. And so there's clear definitions for each of those categories. So I'm not sure what the object is. It's not what you normally think is an object, though. Am I correct, Dean?
It could be anything.
Anything.
Really.
Okay. Well, we should find out whether the object still
Great.
exists,
Yeah.
right? Where is
It should be
it?
accessible at the Historical Society
Yeah,
Museum.
Yeah.
So people can learn these things.
exactly.
Joe Getty was involved with the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties.
Yes.
And he did our property.
Did your farm.
Yeah. Now, is that part of the national?
It's part of that data set, yes,
Oh.
that the National Park Service maintains the National Register.
Oh, all right.
And in fact, there was, before I retired, there was a big push to scan all of the documentation for all of the National Register properties, all that the National Park Service had, because the National Archives wanted them, and the National Park Service didn't want to relinquish them, and so it became this big to-do. But from my perspective as a historian, it doesn't matter to me if I look at something online or I see a copy of something. I'm interested in the information that it contains. Is it really cool to look at original documents? Absolutely. You know, you got to make sure you don't salivate and ruin them because you're so excited that you're looking at this original really cool thing. But, you know, from a practical standpoint, really what you need is the information. And that's what's the critical part of it. So these are some organizations that can help you provide assistance to you in preservation efforts. The Maryland Historic Trust is basically the SHPO, right?
That's right.
They're the State Historic Preservation Office. See, I'm having to switch gears because Pennsylvania, which is where most of my experience is, operates completely differently from how Maryland operates. And so I'm down here trying to navigate what I think I know, and I keep, you know, not going in the right direction. So I'm figuring it out. I'm still new to this retirement thing. There is another organization called Preservation Maryland, which is, as Jim said, I've just recently been elected to the board, and I can't be more excited to be involved with this organization. They are amazing. The work that they're doing, the things, the creativity of how they are approaching preservation across the state. And then there's the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area. There are 13 heritage areas in the state, and this organization covers us. And there are monies, there's technical assistance, there's all kinds of support. They're just down in Frederick, so they are close by. Only a phone call away, a short trip away. So now's my Preservation Maryland part where I talk a little bit more in depth, and I'm actually going to spend a little bit more time talking about this group simply because I'm associated with this group. The mission is to protect our past for the benefit of our future. And this is a statewide nonprofit organization that has been in operation since 1931. And they were instrumental in helping to preserve Hampton National Historic Site. Have any of you ever been to Hampton in Baltimore County? They, at that time, were called, I think, the Society for the Preservation of Maryland Antiquities was the name of the organization at that point. Hampton becomes a national park in 1948. The National Park Service doesn't show up to start administering it until 1980. So this organization it was basically them and Historic Hampton Inc. were managing the site till the Park Service got there. It protects places that tells our state's history. These folks are storytellers. And as Jim said, it's about story. And it really is about story. Because I don't know about you, but when we were in school and we were taught history, it was, here's this date and here's this event. Here's this date and you've got to know that. But nobody tied it together to make you understand why a specific date was important to you or why it was even relevant to you. Because I can tell you, there's a lot of stuff we're talking about now for the 250. Guess what? It's pretty relevant to what's going on in our country right now. But people don't know their history. And so this organization is trying to help tell the story about the state of Maryland. We have done work in 23 counties in Maryland and Baltimore City, supporting large and small projects. This is a really cool aspect of it. The organization is working with the state parks. And when you think of a state park, do you think of historic resources? Not usually. Well, guess who built the state parks? The Civilian Conservation Corps. And so there are they've identified almost 1,200 resources that are cultural resources to be protected. And so this organization is working very closely with the state parks, and they're getting funding for state parks because some of them are really small, not very well known, and so they're able to help get funding and give more visibility to lesser known places, which I think is pretty cool. The initiatives that we have, we're getting ready to kick off a capital campaign. It's called Old Line Rising. I brought the pamphlet along if anybody was interested in looking at it. The key initiatives of that are saving iconic places, growing smarter education and funding, and also the historic trades program. Obviously, the saving iconic places, that's pretty obvious what that is. Growing smarter it's providing advocacy for when communities are facing development, that open spaces are considered as part of that development, that the development is created in such a way that it's sustainable for the future. Because sometimes developments get built, the developer tells you you're going to get all these wonderful things, and then they leave, and who's left holding the bag? And so our organization is trying to help people think a little bit more broadly about how to protect your community when these things are happening. Education and funding, technical assistance is things like we have historic architects, we have landscape architects, we have historians that are able to help you. If we don't know the answer, we can help you go to figure out where you need to go. And funding is pretty obvious. There's grants that are available to this organization. This, though, I think this is probably the thing I'm most excited about with this organization, is the Historic Trades Program. Part of the National Park Service is a Historic Preservation Training Center. It used to be in Williamsport, Maryland. It's now in Frederick, Maryland. And this group of people are training preservationists, the people that you see working on the roofs, the people that you see replacing windows, the people that are working on masonry, the people that are caring for monuments. Many of them are trained through the Historic Preservation Training Center. And it is a small group of people that do incredible amounts of work all across the country. And this campaign for historic trades isn't just in Maryland. It's based in Maryland, but it is across the entire country. There is the first list there, the preservednet.org, is a place where if you have a young person who's interested in learning a trade, or a young person who wants to go work in a museum, if they look at preservednet.org, all the jobs that the parks post where we need help are listed on that at that website. There's also an internship that's called NCP. It's the National Council for Preservation Education. And in the NCP, you actually get paid a pretty decent salary to go do internships and opportunities in national parks. historictrades.org tells you a little bit more. And we are the philanthropic partner of the National Park Service for the historic trades
Do
program.
those historic trades people get a special certification when they complete?
Yes, and if you go through, I think the Preserve Net, Nick Redding is the president, CEO of our organization. I had lunch with him last Monday, and I think he said we have 900 contractors now that are offering opportunities for apprenticeships.
Like plastering and.
Plastering, yeah, right, the-
Metalwork. and-
Yes, yes.
That's so great.
And they're working with the Department of Labor to get them, as you said, certified. I know that in our last annual meeting, there's a fella, I think he's down on the Eastern Shore, who does historic windows. And he has taught so many people how to rebuild wooden historic windows, which, by the way, have a higher R value than the metal and plastic replacements that all of us think we need to have on our buildings. So, and I got to meet Preservation Maryland because HPTC did a massive work on, if you all can remember, around the National Cemetery in Gettysburg, there's a massive stone wall. It needed to be completely repointed. Some of the capstones had to be reset. And HPTC did that work for the park as part of this historic trade initiative. And so, as the cultural resource person, I was of course out there saying, this is fantastic, we couldn't have done it ourselves. And so I think the lesson for this group is partnerships and relationships. And that's what community's all about, right? Is establishing those relationships. And if you can't do it yourself, figuring out who can help you do the work that you need to get done. So there are grants available at each of these organizations. I put it's not the full https, it's just if you look up mht.maryland.gov, if you look up preservationmaryland.org, and then heartofthecivilwar.org, to go look for yourselves to see all of the opportunities that are available. Just for example, this is the kind of money that's available out of the Maryland Historic Trust. It's a sizable amount of money, but you have to apply and you have to pay attention to what the application says, because I think people fail on their applications when they don't follow the instructions. You need to be really careful. Yes, Dave?
You have to be a nonprofit to apply for these, or?
No.
No, it helps. But I think a lot of nonprofits do get these grants. A lot of them are sponsored by local governments, but I see a lot of churches get grants. A lot of churches need historic preservation.
Mhm.
So the grants are, let's put it this way, there are many more organizations that apply for the grants than actually get awarded them. And there is a committee at the Historic Trust, since that's what my experience is with, that reviews all of the grant applications and makes recommendations for which organizations get grants.
Are you, or are there people that can help people who are not familiar with the process?
Yes,
through the
definitely.
process?
At the Historic Trust,
Okay.
there are people who can coach how to put their grants together to make them more successful than they would be if they just, tried to apply without any instructions.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think most of these organizations have like online webinars sort of thing of this is how you fill out the application and then you can ask questions. And in my experience in working with these groups, you can call them and they're incredibly helpful because they want their money to go to good projects. They want to help you fund your project. The problem is there's not enough money to go around for all of the good projects that are out there. And so as more organizations become aware of these places to be able to knock on the door, there's more and more applicants. So it behooves you, if you are interested in participating in this, and again, relationships are really, really important, and you just need to pick up the phone and sort of push yourself in the door and make a relationship with these organizations.
So isn't the Dealman Inn in New Windsor, aren't they getting a huge amount of money from the Historic Trust?
I don't know. I don't know.
I believe they are, or they have in the past.
Because I think on the website, it says that the Dealman is like their project of the year or something like that.
It's owned by the city, isn't it?
It is owned by the city, yes.
Yeah.
I remember going to the Maryland Historic Trust website, and it listed the Dealman. I don't remember the context, but.
So I think the point that I'm trying to make is there's money available to help you,
Right.
because preservation is expensive.
And the other thing available, I don't know if it still is, but we went through this process with our farm, and you can get tax credit. That's the way they, if you're an
Correct.
individual.
That's right, right
If
here.
you comply
Yes.
with the methodology of the time that your structure was originally built.
Correct,
And-
because you have character defining features
Yes.
at that building, and they want to make sure that those are
Even down
maintained.
to the kind of mortar you use in the
Correct.
stonework and so forth.
The Secretary of the
Yeah.
Interior's
Standards,
standards.
yes.
And I'll
Yes.
pass this around. but,
And, you know, and to the point of mortar is really important, that you get the correct mortar
It is.
on a historic structure, because you can drive around towns and you can look at buildings and you can see where somebody slopped Portland cement on joints, and that building is gonna die because the Portland doesn't allow it to be a building and move and breathe the way a building needs to do. Is that a correct way to say that, Dean? You're the architect, I'm just the historian who has seen and been appalled and cried out.
It has to do with moisture.
Yes,
Yeah, it has to do with how flexible the mortar is. And high lime mortars are softer and more forgiving for the historic brick primarily, but they're also better at keeping moisture out. Brick is a very absorptive material, and unfortunately, Portland cement mortars are too rigid. And,
Non-permeable.
well, they're just, they don't flex with the bricks. And as a result, the edges of the bricks spall, moisture gets in, it freezes, it spalls the surface of the brick, but also often the mortar joints, and then you have real problems.
so back to what I said originally, someone is telling you how to manage your space.
If you want
If you
tax-
want tax credits, if you want to get a loan. But none of what's in the Secretary of Interior standards is unreasonable, I don't feel. You know, if your intent is to preserve a historic resource, this is the stuff that you need to do in order to do that. Because when you deviate from that, that's where you start messing things up. And, you know, once it's gone, and you don't get it back. So, Preservation Maryland currently has the Heritage Fund open. It closes on the 28th of March. Unfortunately, their training session was a couple of weeks ago. But you can still go online, because I think they recorded it, so you can still see what they told people about applying for the grants. For all of these organizations, for the Maryland Historic Trust, and Dean, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the Maryland Historic Trust, money comes from the Park Service to them. They get some money from the federal government that they then distribute out throughout the state. There's also state funds Preservation Maryland is currently at the State House while the legislature is in session, advocating for making sure that funds get applied to the heritage areas, because last year there was, the heritage areas were on the chopping block on the governor's budget, and so you need advocacy groups to go and speak for these things. Because again, for some reason, preservation sometimes doesn't seem to be as important to everyone as it is to a person like me who has spent their entire life preserving things. They also can provide assistance to Main Street in technical assistance and also in direct funds. I'm not clear what the status of Tawnytown's Main Street is at this moment, so I'm not going to speak anymore. I purposefully left Main Street off because I did speak to the mayor at his January table talk or whatever it's called, and it was an interesting conversation, and I'm not quite sure where Main Street is falling or what is going on, so that's all I'm going to say about that. The Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area has both non-capital and capital grants. Those are the dollar amounts for theirs. Again, their monies come from donations. They have corporations that give them money, but it's also state money that is then being distributed out to the communities. And that is the end of the slideshow. Dean has some stuff that he wanted to share with you all, so I'm gonna step aside and let him speak to what he wishes to speak to. You're welcome. I hope it was clear.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about was the historic tax credit program that the Historical Trust runs. And I brought examples of the applications that people would need to fill out if they wanted to apply for historic tax credits for their personal residence. Now, there's also a separate application for historic commercial properties, but that's what these are. The applications are in 3 parts, but basically, before I get into those weeds, historic tax credits exist as a recognition that trying to preserve historic properties can often be more expensive than just standard construction. And so it's a way to encourage the preservation by offering tax incentives. At the state level, those tax incentives are available for personal property, for people's homes. And you can get up to 20% of what you spend back in terms of a tax credit on your income tax by following the Secretary of the Interior's standards for preservation and following the application process. If you have a commercial property, it's possible also to get tax credits from the federal government. That's possibly another 20%. So, you know, if it's a commercial property that you're trying to preserve and you're willing to do it in a way that's been recognized, that doesn't damage the historic fabric that you're working with, you could recover up to 40% of what you spend in terms of income tax credits that come back to you. And I think that if your credit exceeds what your actual income tax is for a year, it can go roll over to the next year and the next year up to 5 years. So that can be pretty valuable. The actual forms to do that are available online. The Maryland Historical Trust is the agency that administers those tax credits both on a state level, but also they will also process federal tax credits applications for commercial properties. And they'll pass those on to the National Park Service. So let me pass these out. It's just to show you what those forms look like. Here you go. It's in 3 parts. The first part has to do with just verifying that the property that you're applying for is eligible. If it's not eligible, then you don't go any further than that. And what makes a property eligible? It's whether it is in a National Register district, or whether it's had a National Register designation applied to it, if it's an individual property. Any of the properties that are here in Tawnytown in the National Register District would be eligible for those tax credits. Once you have submitted the Part 1 application, and if that's accepted, then the Part 2 application actually describes what it is that you want to do. And sometimes you can submit both Part 1 and Part 2 together if you know that your property is eligible. You have to get Part 2, what it is that you're applying for, approved before you start any work. Because any work that you've already done would not be eligible. Then Part 3 is submitted after all the work is done. And it's basically confirming that you have done what you said that you were going to do in Part 2.
Does someone come out then, Dean, and look at what you've done to verify that what you said you're going to do is actually what you did do?
They don't necessarily come out physically, but part of the Part 3 application is to submit photographic documentation that that you've done what it is that you were applying for.
Okay.
Part of Part 2 is to submit the documentation that shows what it is that you propose to do. So it may involve photographs, it may involve drawings, it certainly involves a lot of description, and also cost estimates. I've been a non-voting area representative for Carroll County to the Board of Trustees for the Historical Trust for going on 25 years. So I've seen a lot of these kinds of applications come in, not when they've been submitted, but after they've been rejected. And someone disagrees with the decision of the Historical Trust staff, they appeal to the Historical Trust Board, and then the board hears what it is that they object to. So I've seen some of those appeals be successful, and I've seen a lot of them be rejected. So anyway, it's been an interesting experience to see these kinds of applications from that point of view. I've also submitted an application myself for my office building in Westminster, and I succeeded in getting those tax credits. It's not hard, but you do have to do things properly. If you have wood windows, you're not going to be getting approval for replacing them with vinyl replacement windows. Sorry.
What about if you put storm windows over them?
Storm window, okay, so that's a good question, because although storm windows can alter the exterior appearance of a building, they also serve to preserve the wood windows from, from weather exposure.
Right.
So
You have to remove them to make it, or can you leave them on, depending if you were doing the shutters or whatever?
well, okay, so what is it that you're trying to do? Are you trying to restore the wood windows?
No.
need to remove the storm windows to
it's
do
the
that.
storm windows. The storm windows.
Yeah, they're metal storm windows.
Okay.
That's been put up
But
around the frame of
it's
the,
the shutters on the side, that's
the
what I'm
shutters
talking
on
about,
the side, yeah.
That's what I was thinking of trying to,
I don't understand what it is that you're,
Well, right now, it's got storm windows on, that we've been put on to help,
but.
Yeah.
but
Be a little
it's
more,
the side ones that go on this, on
well,
the
the
outside,
shutters
the
on the-
shutters on the outside.
on the hinges on the outside of the frame. But,
in general, if you're trying to repair historic wood shutters, that's going to be expensive. But the preference is to try to keep them operational. And with storm windows, you're never going to be able to shut those shutters.
Right, no, you
But
don't.
but not to remove the hinges, not to screw the shutters to the building wall, certainly not to replace them with plastic shutters.
that's right, yeah.
I think Winona really gave a good talk, and I feel like
You shouldn't feel like.
You did a good job.
I did the
You
philosophy,
did all
so
right,
when you
man.
talk philosophy, you talk, right?
Doug?
I'll ask to extend the discussion about the shutters specifically and the wood windows. So if you were doing historic preservation and you have shutters that have rot going on, can they be replaced with authentically built wood shutters?
Yes.
That's.
They can be new.
Do you know someone who's a good woodworker?
Yeah, he is.
I actually know a fellow in Southern Maryland who has a company that does a lot of historic preservation work, timber built, big stuff, beautiful stuff. And I want to have a dialogue with him just to find out what he deals with, because it's interesting. But that's why I wondered about, because I want to find out if he's certified to do the windows and shutters, can he rebuild and replace all those specifically?
Yeah, shutters can really be one of the things on your building that deteriorate the quickest. And especially true of louvered shutters, because there's so many parts. And, the wood,
Her father is the one that will build them, he's the cabinet maker.
yeah. The wood dries out, it shrinks, the slats fall out.
And they're not, slats aren't actually tight fit, they're loose fit for that reason, because
They
they
have to.
stretch.
Yeah, and it's the same with paneled shutters too, that you make them like like the panels in a wood door. You don't glue them all in place, because then when the wood swells or it shrinks and the panels crack, and no good.
Thank you.
So, do you guys have a list of crafters, manufacturers, or whatever? So we own 9 York, the carriage house that was shown in 9 York Street. We're getting to the exterior of the main house this year. We have 4 of the original windows that are cracked, split from sill to sill, and they need to be replaced. There's nobody locally that can replicate that glass. That's the original glass.
Yeah.
Okay, we already know we're going to have to redo, all of the woodwork around it, but the glass in particular, okay? Do you have a list of craftsmen that can replicate that glass? I'm asking because my research has me going all the way to New England to have somebody who can make wavy glass and curved at the same time. Wavy and curved.
Wavy and curved.
Wavy and
Okay,
curved.
that's
I mean, I know there's nobody locally that can do that.
that's a tall order.
And
Oh,
Are there resources for that? I guess what I'm saying, a list of
Maybe salvage places?
that's what I was gonna say, there are companies that,
Because of the curved windows. She told me that herself when
that they can salvage and use it for
Well, so here's
your,
the thing, so, I mean, do I wanna go, I appreciate that reference, but like, I can't go through, like, ancient junkyards for glass for a house that was specifically built in a specific way. Like, I gotta have somebody who can, when they pull that pane out, they have to be able to put one
The
in.
people at the place, I can't remember the name of the place, but in Linwood, they're very knowledgeable. But he's been taking apart historic buildings and barns for
Decades.
And-
decades.
and
So
you,
maybe they would know somebody if they don't
They
have.
might.
Okay.
and you might reach out to Preservation Maryland too, because they're big into deconstruction of historic buildings and
Yeah.
trying to find places that can use the materials from, instead of the historic fabric winding up in a landfill,
Yeah.
and they would know who could do that work
The
too.
thing that I'm afraid of is like our house is like, it's like the weird architectural house that's got like the bay windows and the fancy curved windows and all that, but some of those curved windows with the wavy original glass are broken. And when we go to do that, I gotta have everything ready to
Sure.
go before we pull it out.
Let me get Richard, let me get you and Richard together and have him come look.
There's a question, if the material is no longer
I mean, I
available
can't-
anywher,
I
like they
can't take
can't
it out
find it,
without
can they
having
still get
something
tax
put in
credit
it,
for
you know what I mean?
doing the best
It
they
has to
can?
have it be accurate.
Yes.
You know,
For example,
Did you
if,
hear that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
Even
that.
if you find, if you cannot find your wavy glass anywhere, he said you can still get tax credit if you've done the best job you can with what's available.
Well, I know that there are companies that can replicate it.
Oh.
All right, and like, so we didn't buy that place to do it as best we can. We're gonna do it the way it's supposed to be.
Fantastic.
So it's like, I just gotta find out who that is. So-
Isn't there doesn't Gettysburg have a place, where they have an auction every year where they auction off the things that, they had taken out during the preservation projects?
No, not on the park. The work that you're thinking of is on historic buildings in the town itself. That is managed by, trying to remember, it's Historic Gettysburg, Adams County, HGAC, I think is the name of the
Right.
organization. And they currently have that stored at the Daniel Lady Farm out 116. But that is not, anything that comes out of the park belongs to all of us, and it doesn't go to anybody else because it is federal property. You can't go digging stuff out of dumpsters and, cause if it shows up somewhere,
Sure.
Somebody's in trouble.
Guess what? Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I've actually checked, three-state area, none of the architectural salvage places have large panes of wavy bubble glass. It just doesn't exist, and if they get it, it's sold right away. It's hot commodity.
Sure.
I will figure it out.
Yeah, the
One
Historical
window at a
Society, the Historical Society of Carroll County recently looked into repairing some of the windows on the Shellman House, and it was really difficult to find appropriate glass. The contractor from Millersville was able to do that, but boy, was it expensive.
Is the Historical Society in Westminster aware of these grants and,
Yes.
and these professional people, craftsmen, red lists of these people that you can share with them? Because I remember we were going through this, we were trying to find people to help us, and they couldn't give us any information. This was a long time ago, but I hope they're aware.
Well, there's a commercial organization, Historic Preservation Directory, that lists craftsmen. They pay to be listed in there, but that's available online. The Historical Trust, I don't think they're allowed to make any recommendations of specific contractors.
But do they maintain a list? I know the Pennsylvania SHPO maintains a list of archaeologists. If, for example, if you need to have work done, they don't tell you who to go to, they just give you a list of these are people that are approved because they will meet, the Secretary of Interior
But the
standards.
tradesman program, they would keep a list.
Well,
wouldn't
this
they?
tradesman's program it's so needed. I mean, the conversation that we are having right here is the prime example of why it is so critical to have a historic trades program, that there are people that are actually able to do
Do
this
they
work.
maintain a list of their
I
graduates?
don't know.
That's pretty.
That's a really good
important.
question. I can,
Why do it if you're not out there?
correct.
I think they do. I think they do.
Yeah.
Big secret.
Gosh, I hope not.
Secret information.
I hope not.
Hey, Dean, I have a sort of general question. I think Winona spoke to this, but from your experience of being in the county and seeing towns go through this process of identifying and restoration work, how have you seen towns transform, whether it's like in terms of creating community or business opportunity? Have you witnessed that yourself in terms of towns going through this and what the outcome has been? I mean, I think it's a no-brainer, the answer, but I just wonder what you've seen and experienced.
Well, it could be a no-brainer, but let me contrast Westminster versus Frederick, okay? In Frederick, there was a very strong historic district that was established. And although there was, some pushback on it, I think over the years, it really has proven to be very successful in maintaining the historic identity in Frederick. In Westminster, I was involved when the historic district was first established. I was a charter member of the Historic District Commission, and the city council was very concerned about imposing additional restrictions on people. So it was a question of restriction against protection, And what they did in Westminster was that they made inclusion in the local zoned historic district voluntary. So people could submit their property to be included in the historic district, but they weren't, it wasn't imposed on them. And as a result, Westminster has lost, several historic properties over the years. And at this point, there's still only 2 properties that are in the Westminster Historic District. One is Rebecca Orenstein's old house on Pennsylvania Avenue. The other one is the office building that I used to own on East Main Street. And I felt like it was important for me to submit my property as a demonstration that I was supporting this as a member of the Historic District Commission. It didn't catch on. But nevertheless, there are still a lot of historic properties in Westminster that remain. Unfortunately, not as many as there would have been if we had those protections.
So another part of the question, using Westminster as an example, if you walk from Longwell Avenue towards the railroad tracks, the first block on the right side of the street, because there haven't been restrictions on professional retail use of that space, when you walk down there, it's like everything, those storefront windows are all curtained off because they're lawyer's office and real estate offices along that street front. So that's a big issue. Like how from this perspective, how do you work that? Because when you walk in that section of the street, it's literally like you're cut off from any relationship with the building. Because literally it's either there's no storefront anymore, it's been literally curtained off, or it's a professional office that has no retail offerings, and half that block is now basically in that situation. So what does the town do?
Well, I don't want to try to make excuses for Westminster. They've got,
Just as an example.
they've got
I mean,
other
yeah.
development
Yeah.
problems. They impose unrealistic parking restrictions on businesses, and as a result, a lot of those properties that are closed off are actually empty.
Right.
Because people can't afford to put in the parking that the city requires.
Mhm.
How do you encourage retail use of buildings like that? It's not really a historic preservation it's not really an aspect of historic preservation. It has more to do with, I think, with attracting people to have those, to encourage those kinds of businesses. And maybe that having a preserved historic downtown can be that attraction, Certainly, one of the nice things about preserving a historic town is that it won't have the same identity or character as every other town. It'll be unique. Like Tawnytown is unique. You won't see those buildings other places. You'll see some that look something like that, You'll see a lot of those kinds of towns, both up in Pennsylvania and down here in Piedmont, Maryland, but they won't be identical.
And to that point, historic experiences are economic drivers.
If you look at the economic development studies on places that have history as the main driver, it's a big deal. And I think people tend to forget that, how much money can come into your community as a result of the fact that people want to experience your community. And exactly what Dean just said, you know, it's a unique place. It's not like you drive across this country and every town looks the same because there's a Walmart and a CVS and a, you know, we have very awesome, cool buildings in this space that, and it's really kind of cool to walk downtown and look at them. And every time I drive through town, I'm frustrated that I'm sitting at a red light, but at the same time, the red light's giving me an opportunity to look at a house that I haven't had a chance to really ponder and see the really, like, coming up Baltimore Street, just coming into town to see you guys. I found another building that had dental work across the top of the roof line that I've never seen, and I've lived here 40 years. So, you know, it's, I think people forget that part of it. They forget that it is an economic driver.
If the town,
Supports it.
if they have the vision to do it and the guts to do it,
Yeah.
because
Well,
that's where
the
this
thing.
town is right now.
It often just boils down to
So I want
economics,
to
you
make a
know.
point, to your point, which is very important for Tawnytown, that we as citizens and stakeholders need to pound that thought into the minds of our city council and mayor, because they just don't get it. And going forward with any revitalization or Main Street development, it's gotta be said that we need to stand up for that very point for the economic prosperity of our town and surrounding area. So, had to be said, it's a good place to say it.
Let's also make sure that people understand that historic preservation doesn't mean that you have to take your property back to any specific time period. That each building is really a record of the life that it's lived, you know, that its occupants have lived. And it's gone through changes over the years. Preservation would seek to maintain that character that's built up over the years. I mean, as an architect, I love to design new buildings, and really, you know, I like for those buildings to have their own identity. Well, these historic buildings should have their own identity, that really they maintain, that they preserve, that belongs to them. And let's hope that they don't lose that character through, you know, what they call remodeling.
Tawnytown has a flyer that you can walk through town, and it describes the different buildings and the history behind it. If you pick up that
Walking
brochure,
tour. Yeah,
walking
that's a
tour
great
of
thing. I wanna
Tawnytown.
do
It's
it.
really neat to do. I did it one year with my mother.
I'd like to see that
Yeah.
published again.
We
I haven't
have
seen-
lots of them at the
Oh.
museum.
Yes.
Come to the
Yeah.
museum, we have thousands of them,
Yes,
so.
and to walk
I
through
got a
it.
copy at the car dealership, the Ford place, yeah.
Yes, well, they're very involved in the museum.
Jim,
Wondering if you could share thoughts on the Secretary of the Interior Standard number 9 about I think that's the one where new work is supposed to be on a historic structure, is supposed to be kind of set aside, like set apart visually so that you can tell it's not the original building. And that, I think that's a little bit challenging, you know, as a homeowner. Say if I wanted to, you know, make some modification, I might want it to look like it's always been there. And that would be counter to the Secretary's standards. I wonder if you have any thoughts on how you approach that.
That's a good question,
yeah, modern or contemporary additions should they should have their own time period identity, you know. They should really be recognizable as being part of this time. But they should also be sympathetic to the character of the building that you're adding to. Now, if you're talking about making changes to your historic building, your historic house or whatever, for example, the porch columns that you were talking about, that's more a matter of, I think, trying to replicate historic fabric that's been lost. And if you have other examples of that you can call on, then, you know, try to make it look like what it is that you're replacing. If you're making a whole new addition, then that can have its own character, but it should be sympathetic. And that's one of those things that's, there's no one answer that's right. Every situation is a little bit different. And that would be, you know, a challenge for me as an architect to try to design something that that not only is compatible, but really enhances what the original building was.
So I guess you try to find a line between the remodeling and
But in his case of his porch post, he could replace in kind the same materials, similar look, and still be okay.
Yes.
Correct?
That's
So,
correct.
you've got a concrete post. If you put a concrete post back that looks similar to what you have, you're replacing in kind. You're not putting a wood post in where you've got concrete posts on every other part of your porch. Am I saying that
and
correctly?
the question wasn't specifically about my.
I know
porch,
it wasn't,
yeah.
but I know it wasn't, but we had just been talking
Just don't
to
put
you
one
about
that's up that's PVC, please.
But it's a good question. I mean, it really is a good question, because how do you, and I looked at there's a house going out of town where a small outbuilding was constructed. Hip roof, it matches the house. It's contemporary but compatible. And it's a new building, but it looks like it should be there. And it's not those fake barn things that you go by at Littlestown that you haul in and plop down, next to, imagine him doing that next to his house. That would be pretty jarring and
My
pretty awful.
smokehouse wouldn't allow it.
Yeah, so, it's extreme, but, and to his point, you can design things that are contemporary but compatible.
And so, let's give an example here in Tawnytown. The police station, that was designed to look like a train station.
Right.
And it's appropriate because it's right next to the train tracks. It's got some modern materials, but it's got some forms like the long roof overhangs and so forth that are inspired by historic train stations. So it works. Doug.
I'm gonna do a far reach here, but since we got two really knowledgeable people. So, way back, we did a replanning for Tawnytown, looking at the long-term future. And one of the things that we talked about in that discussion was people from throughout the community. I don't know if you were part of that or not. It was out at the pond, up the park, behind Food Lion. But one of the things that we talked about is bringing in fast food restaurants, those kind of things. Where we if you could bring a small Lowe's up here or hardware store, whatever it is. But the fact that the architects that work with McDonald's and Taco Bell and Dunkin' Donuts, they would rather work on something that's unique to the historic town as a design that works for that restaurant, rather than putting up the cookie cutter McDonald's or whatever you can see. How does that play into, you know, as we're talking about bringing more restaurants into town? I know there's always that dialogue on Facebook. But how does this all play into how to steer the town to ask those entities to go back and redesign, do a design that is more for an old town rather than, you know, cookie cutter, ugly gray McDonald's that they're currently building?
Well, the town does have design standards, you know, a document that can be given to those developers. And something that, when was it that we worked on that, Jim? It was like 30 years ago,
It was
20
About the
years.
same time
about
frame as
20
the
years ago.
20 years ago.
Strategic planning session is what I was talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So that document exists, and as far as I know, still being followed.
That does only apply to the historic district.
Right.
So there are communities in the state that have extreme design standards. For instance, we did Main Street projects in Easton. And Easton's historic district is very strict, one of the strictest in the state. And in fact, the town itself has design standard codes that, so like chain stores, restaurants, they cannot get into the historic downtown district. They can relocate on development property along Route 50, but even then, those buildings have to look a certain way. They all have to be brick. They can't be their whatever chain, you know, reaction is. You know, they all have to look a certain way, and they get a lot of fluff about it, but they all end up there. You know, so just saying, you can have.
When I asked that
You
question.
can have a Taco Bell, you can have a McDonald's, you can have whatever you want outside of the historic district, and you can still, if the town decided to be that bold, you can still make it look a certain way.
Right.
If they wanna be here, they'll be here.
Right.
I've seen that done in other places.
Well, you know, when you talk about
You
the economic.
just gotta care about it enough to do it.
When you talk about the economic impact and the economic draw for people to come here and enjoy the small town atmosphere, that's part of it, is instead of having the cookie cutter, ugly,
McDonald's and Sheets.
yeah, have something that
Are
looks.
they in the historic district?
They're not,
No, they're
they're
not.
not,
They're not.
but it still doesn't mean that the
But-
town can't lean
But
that
that's
way.
that's the gateway to your community.
Yes,
You
yeah.
know, that's the
Yeah.
first thing
Yeah.
people see when they come into town is, you know, Sheetz, Highs, McDonald's, blah, blah, blah.
Well, and
And then they
goes-
get to the good stuff.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
It goes back to the basic question, though. If you don't ask the question, you don't get the answer. So,
Correct.
I mean, so that's.
Well, and I do think that Tawny Town is at a place right now where these kind of conversations need to be happening and decisions need to be being made because, like I said when I was talking, once it's gone, it's gone. You don't get it back. And you can pretend that it's the real thing, but the real thing it evokes an emotion, I think. For me, it does. I'm speaking for myself. When
It's got a flavor.
Correct, you know, like
It's a story.
it
It's
is,
history.
it is, and I mean, this is a ridiculous example because it's in a completely different country, but when I came up out of the subway and saw the Coliseum for the first time, I cried. I absolutely
It's
cried.
crazy stuff, isn't it?
Because I was in the
Unbelievable.
presence of this thing that, oh my gosh, the stories that it could tell. And that's what we have in our town, is the stories that these buildings could tell. If we just listen. So,
So-
but I'm speaking to the choir here, I know it, but that's,
So one question I had, going back to like tax credits and things like that, so in our historic district, which I live in, we do have a lot of older folks that own that own some historic homes. And they may not even understand what the tax credit is, but they're also, like, if they do, they might say, like, well, I'm 80. I don't care about getting a matching grant to, you know, do a roof or to do, you know, gingerbread or whatever it is, because I'm just old, you know, I'm not gonna do
Social
that.
Security. And
Do we
then
have,
cash to do.
and it's, yeah, and it's, a lot of the grant programming, it is matching, all right? How do we incentivize some of the older homeowners that might need maybe a little freshening up of their property? You know, I don't know if there's any, I'm pretty sure there's not any extra programming out there for that, but like, I mean, how are historic districts with older residents and property owners kind of working with them to get their properties done? Like somebody like me, we're just doing it, all right? Other people, just, some people are getting grants, whatever. But, you know, I can see 4, 5, maybe 6 people on both sides of the street going towards Littlestown that are in a situation where they might want their house to look better, but they're not really incentivized to do it.
Well, you know, more forums like this one.
Awareness.
Yeah, letting people know that these resources are available. The National Register District is, it's an enabling district. It's not restrictive. It's not like a locally zoned historic district that has a commission that you know, reviews proposals that people have and actually says whether, you know, whether they can or can't do that. It's a district that enables landowners, property owners, to get credits for the work that they do. But it doesn't mean that they can't do what they want if they don't apply for those credits. In other words, you know, their property rights are not infringed upon.
They could accidentally do it right and not get the tax credit. I mean, it's that simple.
They could do that.
Yeah.
It's more likely that they would do
They'll
something
do that,
wrong
right.
and not qualify for the tax credits.
Maybe we need to make a Tawny Town Historic Commission, or maybe there is one.
So they
A newsletter.
just started Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's an architectural, and I think now he's calling it architectural and revitalization committee.
Oh.
So
Because
Who's
if people-
on
we
it?
have yet to meet.
If
but-
people don't think,
Or
if
is
people-
is there an architect on it?
There is an architect.
Okay.
if people don't
historical
know that
architect?
people
I
care,
do not believe that she is, no.
Difference.
Yeah.
because if people
Just
in
saying.
town don't.
Well, that's the
know
reason
that
why
people
afterwards
care
I
about
wanna
this,
meet
they might
with,
think,
I
"Oh,
wanna
nobody cares, so
talk
I
to you
just
guys
stay in my house." Neon and yellow.
I think a big step in that direction, somebody would have to take the lead on that. But if there was an invitation to everyone that owns a historic property in town, out or in the area, to come to an informational meeting like this, and at the meeting, there were 3 or 4 folks that can talk about the project they already did and completed and what they got from it. It wasn't hard, was it?
Information sharing could be a
Yeah.
huge thing for
Absolutely,
people.
you know,
That-
because,
They don't know where to go for help or anything.
and those of you that have done it can say what was great, what was not so great about the process that you went through.
But just to show that you care about your community and how it's gonna live through time, you know, I just think it's important information
Yeah.
for the homeowners.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the homeowners that own historic properties and invest in them are ahead of the culture of the community. Because they're already saving the thing that they care about, but you gotta change the culture in this town to care about it enough to actually join in and make it something special.
Mhm.
Because the buildings get saved, that's great, but if they stay unused, if they don't get repurposed, they don't become part of the mainstream culture, doesn't matter.
And,
That's
You don't
and,
want a
this is
ghost
where the
town.
town is right
Yeah,
now.
you don't
This
want
is
a
where
ghost
this town
town.
is right now.
and you know, if you put a lot of love into your property, what assurances do you have that your neighbor isn't going to
There is none.
do something to ruin it?
There is none. And, I mean, I've got a neighbor whose house was a gleaming example of architecture in the town. And, you know, I'm not gonna pick on him because he, you know, he's going through some things, you know, and, you know, he's my neighbor. And I'm not, you know, I'm not calling him out. I'm just saying, there's an example that everybody likes to talk about, all right, of deterioration, all right? But nobody's really gone to bat to help him figure that out. I mean, there's been attempts to, can you do this, can you do that? But nobody's really met him where he's at. You know, finding him and let's making it punitive, that doesn't do jack. You know, doesn't incentivize anybody. But my point is this, you're right. But all of us that own these properties that put money into it, you know, this is a crapshoot out here right now. The amount of money I'm putting in on my property, there's no guarantee I'll get it out. Because we haven't done the things in the district to make the district rise, to make it attractive. Okay? All right, so if, I mean, everybody's got an idea about that, we'll wait and see. All right? All the big boys want to talk, we'll get it done. All right, we'll wait it out, we'll wait for that. But it doesn't matter if it doesn't, we're still gonna save that property. Because the history is what's important to us. It's not about the money, it's about the history. We wouldn't have bought the place if all we cared about was just how we're gonna flip it. We don't flip historic properties, we save them.
Well said.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to end, because we're already taking you guys past our 9 o'clock, and I'm sorry about that.
So, in closing,
Yeah, Jim, sorry.
your attention for a second, please. Just for a second. Hello. Just for a second, before you go. So one thing I wanted to close with is just the awareness that the decisions we make that might seem really small and some really big really shape the experience for generations to come. And so the quality of space we really create now is just so far reaching, I don't think we really have that perspective so much. So there's a real opportunity to create this quality of community through the space that we do put together that just has huge impact. So just want to keep that in mind as we make these decisions, and with all these great ideas and trying to bring people together. I think it's really important to know that it's going to be around a while and what we're putting together. So next month, as I said, it's going to be the second Thursday. It'll be this 100-fold farm talking about co-housing. And as always, if you're interested in volunteering any time with Envision Tonytown, please talk to me, and there's lots of stuff, kind of neat things we're doing. So just want to thank you all for coming, and thank Winona and Dean for a really great. If I don't have your email address and you want to know about things we're doing, there's a sign-up sheet in the back if you're not on the list, so we can keep you informed of what things we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.